Okay, welcome everyone. We're glad that you were able to join us this morning. My name is Dan Bromberg. I am the interim director of the Carsey School of Public Policy, and we're thrilled to be bringing you our Coffee and Conversations this Wednesday morning. Coffee and Conversations is a discussion series jointly organized by the Carsey School of Public Policy, the state of New Hampshire Bureau of Education and Training, and the New Hampshire Association of Certified Public Managers. We've been doing this now for a number of years, both in person and online, and we're thrilled that we get you all to show up and listen this morning. And we're more than happy to have Robert Tourigny with us this morning to share information about housing and some of the issues around housing that we've been experiencing in our state. So by way of introduction, Robert Tourigny is the executive director of NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire. He joined the organization nearly 20 years ago in 2005. And Robert will be talking a good amount about what they've done over those years and what's happening right now. So I'll let him kind of dive into that. But let me just give you a bit more of his background. He's been involved in several initiatives that address community development and affordable housing in New Hampshire. Locally, he serves on the Governing Council of Housing Action New Hampshire, on the board of directors of the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority and Granite United Way. Nationally and regionally, he has served on the board of directors of the National Rural Housing Coalition and the Northern New England Housing Investment Fund, and as chair of the Advisory Council for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. So just a ton of experience in this space, loads of insight. So Robert, we're thrilled that you're able to join us this morning. Really looking forward to your remarks and what you have to say, and looking forward to a great conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Robert, and let you share what you have to share with us. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be with everyone this morning to talk about affordable housing and how challenging it is in New Hampshire to provide more affordable housing, and talk a little bit about how NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire works to address and alleviate that challenge for homeowners and renters, home buyers and renters. So just a bit about NeighborWorks. Dan spoke about my history with the organization. We actually started as a private nonprofit community development corporation over 30 years ago. Our charter, we were chartered as Manchester Neighborhood Housing Services with a focus on neighborhood revitalization and providing affordable homeownership and rental opportunities, specifically in the center city of Manchester. And over the years, we grew to be more of a citywide organization to address affordability challenges in other parts of the city as well. And so we grew out of the tree streets in center city of Manchester and began to serve other parts of the city, including the west side. And then several years ago, we expanded our geographic footprint to try to address more affordability challenges in some of the surrounding communities and more suburban towns around Manchester. And we changed our name to NeighborWorks Greater Manchester as we started to develop new affordable housing opportunities in some of the surrounding communities. And then a few years after that, we had a sister organization that was based in Nashua that closed up shop. And so we expanded to take over the Nashua service area. And that's when we changed our name to NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire. So our geographic footprint includes the Manchester, Nashua region and the 31 towns that comprise that area. And so over the last 30 years, we've developed over 500 units of affordable rental housing. And I'll get into more specifics about that in a moment as to what affordable means. But our other main line of business is our homeownership education program. We've been providing first-time homebuyer education classes and workshops to individuals and families for nearly our entire existence. And so people sign up to participate in one of our workshops, and then they are able to work with a HUD-approved housing counselor one-on-one to really help them get a better understanding of their affordability and what kind of homeownership options might be available to them, and really to lay a plan and lay the groundwork for becoming a successful homeowner. And so for those of you that remember the foreclosure crisis of, several years ago, I used to say if more people got good quality homebuyer education, we probably wouldn't have gotten into such a difficult challenge during that period of time. So we're very proud of our homebuyer education program and the outcomes that people are able to achieve by going through that. And so I think Bailey has posted some links in the chat box. One, if you want more information on NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire, there's a link in there. Home Team NH is our home ownership website for folks that want to pass along information about our homebuyer education program. That's in there. And then I'll talk about some of the affordability challenges. And there are some links and information to data to New Hampshire Housing's website where we get a lot of our data. But more specifically about the work that we do and the challenges that we face in New Hampshire, we've been doing this work for over 30 years. And I keep telling people it just doesn't get any easier. You would think after 30 years, it would be a slam dunk, and we would have this system down pat and be able to replicate it over and over again. But if you are able to go to the New Hampshire Housing website and check out some of the data, you'll see that there's a deficiency of anywhere from 30 to 60,000 units of housing across the state that is amassed not over a short period of time, but it's been decades in the making. And so when you read headlines in the paper and in the news about New Hampshire's affordable housing crisis, it's not a problem that just snuck up on us overnight. It's been decades in the making, and it goes back to land use and limited amount of building and construction over time, and not being able to keep up with the pace. And so as an organization like NeighborWorks, we lay the groundwork in the communities that we work in to express the need and demonstrate how affordable housing can be delivered and what that end product is going to look like, and hopefully are successful in getting projects approved and being able to bring new units online. But it's not a quick process. So what is affordable? Several years ago, the state legislature actually defined affordable or workforce housing. You may have heard the term workforce housing as housing opportunities that are affordable to families on the rental side, an apartment that's affordable to a family earning less than 60% of the area median income. And for sale purchase price, an affordable home or a workforce housing home is affordable to somebody earning less than 100% of the area median income. And so those median income numbers change across the state based on region. And so there's a link in the website or in the chat box to New Hampshire Housing's website that posts what those income limits are across the region. But just to give you an example, Manchester's median income right now is $101,000. And so for a renter, the definition of a workforce housing unit in the Manchester area would be somebody earning less than $60,000 a year. And at 100% of area median income, that would be $101,000. And that would be the income that would be affordable to purchase a home. The problem today in this environment is there's just no housing stock. We have seen a huge decline in the supply and inventory of both homes for sale and apartments for rent. And so if you think about what has happened over the last year and a half or so, with interest rates rising, fewer people are selling their homes, because if you do own a home and you do have a mortgage, odds are 99% of those homeowners, if they sell their house and buy a new one, are going to be end up paying more for the new house and paying more in interest. So they're less likely to sell. So that's having a huge impact on the inventory and supply of homes. So for a first-time homebuyer who's trying to purchase a house, it becomes extremely challenging for them, given the low amount of inventory, the high prices in the market, and the rising interest rates. So all of those sort of create the perfect storm for an affordability challenge for that first-time homebuyer. So if people aren't selling their houses and people aren't able to buy houses, then more people continue to be renting. And so with not enough new rental housing units coming online, there's an extreme shortage of rental housing at the same time. So in my 30 years of experience in developing and working in the housing industry, the scales are usually alternating. If the homeownership market is robust, then the rental market is weakening or softening, and vice versa. If the rental market is strong, then the home buyer market is softening. Well, in this particular climate and market, both are at their absolute peaks because the supply is short on both sides. So it really does attribute to what the headlines say about New Hampshire being in an affordable housing crisis. And it's not unique to New Hampshire. These issues take place predominantly through the Northeast, but certainly across the country. And so it's important to have organizations like NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire and other community development organizations that are focusing on providing affordable housing, because although we do see an increase in housing supply in our region, because there are a lot of new multifamily developments coming online, there's pipelines of thousands of apartment units becoming available, they're not necessarily affordable. I mean, we're seeing new apartments being built in the Manchester area, at $2,000 a month for a studio apartment, $3,000 a month for a 2-bedroom. And those are not considered affordable for somebody earning less than 100% or certainly 60% of the area median income. So the formula that I have always subscribed to for developing affordable housing, and when I speak to municipalities, planning boards, town councils, or anybody who will listen to us, I've often said, if we have access to an affordable piece of land and we have density available to us, we can build, X number of units per acre. And if we have access to utilities, primarily public water and sewer, and even as a plus, historically, natural gas has been a cheaper way of heating units. So if we had access to those utilities, access to density, and access to an affordable piece of land, we could find the financing resources to be able to make the end product affordable. That formula doesn't necessarily ring true today. I think on top of all of that, I think it takes a little magic or a miracle to make things really happen in this environment because of inflation and cost increases, labor shortages, supply chain issues, everything, and rising interest rates. Everything is working against us. And so it feels like we're always paddling upstream as we're trying to develop more affordable housing. Just to give you an example, we completed a project in Merrimack in 2020, 45 new units. And, it was, during COVID, but we were able to finish on time and on budget. Today, we're trying to build a 45-unit project in Nashua, getting ready to start construction there. And it's essentially 40% higher. The costs are 40% higher than they were just a couple of years ago. So I don't have to explain to everybody that, things just cost more today. Time and materials are all more expensive. And so that all contributes to the challenges associated with creating affordable housing. And so what does affordable housing look like? I can share a couple of examples of projects that we've done over the years as to projects. Here's an example of a home in Manchester that we redeveloped about 20 years ago, actually. It's part of it was at one time a large single family mansion. It was the Straw Mansion. It was the home of Ezekiel Straw, who would eventually become governor of the state of New Hampshire. And we renovated that property and built between this building and the buildings surround it 33 affordable units. And so that's just an example of a historic rehab. On the west side of Manchester, we've done acquisition rehab during the foreclosure crisis of 2009 and 10 and 11. We would buy vacant and abandoned properties in the city and renovate them and then turn around and sell them to owner occupants to be able to have an affordable place to live as a homeowner, as well as have a supplemental apartment for them to be able to rent out and earn supplemental income. Here's another property located on the west side of Manchester that was at one time boarded up and vacant, and we were able to renovate it. Some of the more modern or newer properties that we've done include a townhouse development like this in Merrimack, where we have a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom new construction apartments. This is part of a 45-unit development that we did in Merrimack that I mentioned that we finished in 2020. And here is a project that we did in Amherst a little over 10 years ago. This is part of a 28-unit affordable housing rental development that we did in the town of Amherst. So that is a bit about NeighborWorks and a bit about affordability challenges. And I can certainly talk all day about affordable housing, but I would love to hear if folks have any questions or thoughts or anything that I can address for them.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Robert. It's an excellent start to what I'm hoping is going to be a great conversation. Loads of information there. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the work that you do. So folks, if you want to drop your questions into the Q&A, we're happy to pick them up there. I'll start us off with kind of a couple of bigger picture questions, and then we could kind of maybe get into the weeds a little bit more. So when you think about policy solutions, kind of at the higher level, so kind of 2 parts here. I mean, so first, what comes to mind when you say, man, if we just had a policy like that in place, that would really get us on the right track and moving in a direction that would be helpful. And then the second part is, does that policy exist elsewhere, right? Are we seeing success elsewhere that you would say we could replicate something like that, and do that here? So let me turn that over to you and get your thoughts.
I mean, you mentioned earlier, I'm part of the coalition called Housing Action New Hampshire. And I didn't put a link to their website in there, but I would encourage anybody to look them up. Housing Action New Hampshire is a statewide advocacy organization. Up until a few years ago, before the formation of Housing Action, housing policy was pretty much by the seat of our pants, and we really didn't have a lot of direction and leadership and consistency in that work. Housing Action has really helped harness and pull together people with an interest in housing issues and work to address exactly what you're talking about, policy issues, pretty much at the state level, to a certain extent at the federal level and national, at our national delegation as well, but certain at the state level. And so I think in New Hampshire, I think a lot of actual policy is more at the municipal level. And so, we encounter challenges and opportunities at the local town level. And, I used to do, many times, like I said, I would go to a municipality and talk to the board of selectmen or town council or planning board or economic development task force, whatever existed in that town, to talk about the needs of affordable housing, to just help educate and give them a better understanding of what the needs are for their community. And so if there are tweaks or changes that could be made to their land use ordinance that would help alleviate some of the challenges, to help them better understand it. As I mentioned, there's a link to this brand spanking new zoning atlas that just got published, just got released. And that was, nothing like that existed when I was doing those kinds of, those types of visits around to different communities. But that's a place that you can actually point to now and say, if you want to see what can be built and where it can be built, that's a tool that's available for folks to determine that. And so I think it will help, organizations like us or developers that are interested in trying to develop more multifamily or more affordable housing or more single family, small lot subdivision type development projects, being a resource to be able to figure out where that can happen. And if it can't happen, what needs to change in that community from a land use perspective to allow that to happen. So I think in order to get policy changed, it really does needs to start with people having a better understanding and being able to appreciate the challenge and want to make a change and want to make a difference in their community. So
Excellent, thank you. So just a quick follow up from your talk, which is, could you just please restate the definition of affordable, and then I guess added on to that, are there implications, for that definition within legislation or within policy? How does that relate?
Yeah, I might have confused folks when I first spoke up about affordable. So affordable is just a very general term, and our definition of affordable is if you don't have to spend more than 30% of your household's income for your housing costs, you live in affordable housing. So a $2 million home is certainly affordable to a certain population. If they don't have to spend more than 30% of their income to live there, it's affordable to them. What the state defined a few years ago was the definition of workforce housing. And so I think that was, thanks to New Hampshire Housing, provided some clarity, because a lot of municipalities, I think, struggled with this definition of what's affordable. And so the state legislature defined workforce housing as housing that's affordable. You don't have to pay more than 30% of your income for purchase, for sale, home ownership, if you earn less than 100% of the area median income, and for rental housing, if it's affordable to somebody that's earning less than 60% of the area median income. So those were sort of the benchmarks that the state legislature defined as being affordable for workforce housing. So that's sort of the methodology that we stick to when we talk about funding sources for affordable housing. They typically are around those income levels. There are some programs that work to the 80% of area median income. There are some programs that work to 120% of area median income. So that's why I wanted to put that link to the New Hampshire Housing website on there, so that folks could look at what the different income levels are across different regions of the state.
Excellent, thank you, very helpful. So I will read this, and there are a few things I'm not entirely understanding, but let's see. So you may address this. This is from Kelly Jo Easler in Bosquen. You may address this, but I'm very interested in the pros and cons of ADUs in only single family and duplex, detached. I see that as a compromise. No need to sprinkle, just smokes and COs. So I don't know what that means exactly. More affordable for young individuals or couples, as well as elderly. So the idea of accessory dwelling units as ADUs, maybe you could talk about that briefly, and then kind of jump into this conversation. Yeah.
And I mean, there's no one silver bullet. There's no one, specific answer to address the affordability crisis and challenges. It's lots of things. And so I think ADUs are really important.
Robert, could you just tell us, for those of us that don't know, what is an ADU? What are we talking about here?
So it's an accessory dwelling unit. I think some people might refer to it as an in-law apartment. But basically, if you had a single family home and you wanted to convert some space over your garage into an apartment and rent that out to a family member or not a family member. And so there's a definition of an accessory dwelling unit that the state was able to provide legislatively to give towns the authority to authorize accessory dwelling units in their municipal codes. I think some of the challenges associated with ADUs in some jurisdictions is the requirement that it must be attached, or it can't be detached, or it comes with parking requirements that can't be met. For if you just have a single family home and a driveway, and the town is saying, well, if you're going to have an ADU, you have to be able to add 2 more parking spaces to your lot, which may not be feasible or practical. But I think ADUs are definitely a means of alleviating the challenge, because it increases the housing supply. So not everybody needs a 3-bedroom apartment, but if we can provide more studios and 1-bedroom apartments through accessory dwelling units, whether they're attached or detached, is certainly going to help alleviate the challenge, because it should be able to be delivered at a more affordable price than going out and buying a piece of land and building new units. The land is there, the infrastructure is there. Now you just have to pay for the cost of improving an existing space, or adding on a space, an addition to your home, or an addition to your property, to create that accessory unit.
Yeah, great. So, complicated problem and complicated challenges. This is one part of the solution potentially.
It is.
And how we structure our zoning laws locally can kind of aid that process, or they can, prohibit it a bit more.
That's true.
Yeah, makes sense. So a question related to, so this is from Dennis. So Dennis has a few questions. So Dennis's first question, is the problem more pronounced in rural areas? Or maybe you could just actually talk about the distinction about, between the problem in, more rural areas versus kind of our urban centers.
Yeah, I think, I think until the zoning atlas came out, I would have believed that the opportunity in rural areas is less. There's less opportunity in rural areas than urban areas. That would have been my original take. But when you look at the zoning atlas, I think the opportunity to create more affordable units in rural areas is actually greater than in southern New Hampshire in more urban markets. But the challenge is affordability. It's all relative, right? So as I mentioned, if somebody's, there's a $2 million home is affordable to somebody. When you look at the income levels across the state, when you look at rural areas, the income levels tend to be a lot lower than they are in the more metropolitan areas. And so the challenge in a rural area is trying to deliver something that's affordable to that market, to people living in that area. It's very difficult because a 2x4 isn't any cheaper in a rural community in northern New Hampshire than it is in a metropolitan area in southern New Hampshire. The cost of building materials and labor and all of the things that go into it are essentially the same. So although I think that there's a greater opportunity to be able to do it from a land use perspective, there's definitely a challenge because of affordability issues for the end user. So there's different challenges from rural to urban. In an urban area, you have density at working in your advantage because you can tend to build more units per acre. You probably have access to public water and sewer. And so of our 500 plus units, all but one project are on public water and sewer. We have one project that has a private septic system. And so that does impact density. So I think part of the solution is looking at community wells and community water and sewer systems to help alleviate the challenge so that you can achieve a little bit greater density in those rural communities.
Very helpful. So Dennis, I'm going to circle back to a couple of those other questions that you have. I think this one might lead us to one of them. So Erica's answer putting out there that the housing crisis discussion typically focuses on supply side issues, property constraints, labor shortages, building products inflation. To what extent does New Hampshire's reliance on property tax amplify the problem, particularly for the rental market? And is the housing shortage crisis a symptom of the larger demand side problem, the distribution of income?
I would say they're all contributing factors, but I think that the housing crisis is a result of a lack of production for 30 years. I mean, we had a housing boom in the 80s and into the 90s, and there was a lot of retraction from a land use perspective around that. And so very, very, very slow growth in housing production over the last 30 years. And so it has come to a critical mass, or a critical point, because of other economic factors and other economic conditions that have amplified and made that problem more acute. So I think it's a combination of challenges and problems, and I think the quick solution isn't to go out and build 30,000 housing units. I mean, even if you could do that, it's not probably gonna work, but it's gonna take a slow and steady, escalation in housing production to really make a difference. And it needs to happen across the state because it's not unique to any one community.
So could you then kind of dispel kind of the myth that I always thought, which was related to the housing crisis that we experienced, 14 years ago, whatever it was, that was kind of, we started getting to a point where we had overcapacity in the market. And maybe that was on the higher side of the market, but there was kind of this conversation around, well, there's too much stock right now. And that's what's happening. So have we seen that? Is that accurate? And kind of what's that flip side now that it feels like such a tight market that nothing's available? I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, in 2009 and 10, there was a foreclosure crisis, and so vacancy rates in the rental sector were the highest that they'd ever been. But I think it was attributable to the economy at that point in time, and so it was a very, very finite period of time, and financial consequences of what was happening as a result of the mortgage crisis and people losing their homes because there was a rapid decline in home prices. People couldn't sell for what they had leveraged. I mean, it was really a financing problem. People borrowed more than they could tend to afford. They had very little cash or equity or a down payment in their home. Today, it's just the opposite. Like people have an enormous amount of equity in their home because prices have escalated so much, and that's why they're not selling because of the uptick in interest rates. So there's a possibility that things will turn and decline, but probably not to the levels that they were in 2009 and 10 and 11 when vacancies were up and foreclosures were up. The ironic thing is that we didn't see massive price declines in the rental market during that period of time. Rental prices pretty much stayed steady despite some dips in vacancy and dips in occupancy rates, and they've steadily climbed. And then more recently, they've escalated quite rapidly.
Yeah, and there are a few comments kind of related to so George does point out that municipalities already do have zoning power to allow attached and detached ADUs. State ADU law passed in 2016 was more of a requirement that towns must allow attached ADUs in residential zoned areas. So thanks for that clarification, George. I think, what I was implying was kind of in response to what Robert said, that there still might be other requirements alongside those ADUs. And I don't know if that's accurate, but the idea of saying you must have 3 or 4 parking spots, that is prohibitive in certain scenarios, and you may not need it, right? I mean, so that's kind of what I was.
Some towns don't really allow a lot of flexibility around the ADU. They don't allow a lot of flexibility aside from what they would normally require for a single-family detached home, and so it's not really going to help address the problem if the standards are too high, and that's not unique to ADUs. I mean, we see it on multifamily development. We see it in subdivision requirements. That's usually where the challenges are and where it becomes too cost prohibitive to be able to make it feasible to be affordable.
Yeah. So Dennis has a question related to that, and I'll kind of broaden it a bit. So Dennis is asking if there are wealthy communities that resist your efforts. But I guess I'd broaden it to, are there communities that are resisting these efforts kind of across the board to have more affordable housing? And, what does that look like in that?
Yeah. I would say it's a learning process. Like I'll give you an example. I mean, we worked in Londonderry for a number of years because the town had, I think, a 94, 5 or 6% home ownership rate, very, very low apartment renter rate. And so, we worked with the town council, the planning board, an economic development task force. They formed an affordable housing committee to look at what the needs were in their community so that they could come up with new zoning changes to maybe make some accommodations and some changes. And so there's a learning curve, and having people have a better understanding of what affordable means, what it looks like. For the longest time, our biggest challenge was the fear of children and the burden that it would create on a school system. And so, it was quite ironic that by the time we actually got around to doing a project in Londonderry, they were saying, bring it on. We actually need more kids in our school system, because they had built a lot of single family homes, built school systems to accommodate those children in those single family homes. Those children had grown up and gone away, and their school enrollment was down, but yet the cost to run and operate those schools was still every bit as high. So they needed more kids in their schools. So welcoming more housing production made sense, because if you're going to pay for a school system, you want kids in those seats. So But I think the other myth too is that when you build apartments, you're building, you're adding a ton of children to your school district. And New Hampshire Housing and other analysts have done great data compilation to say that that's just not true. You get more children in a 4-bedroom single-family home than you do in a 2-bedroom apartment. And so multifamily does not necessarily equate to higher taxes to this community because of for school reasons. So
yeah, it's an interesting point, right? And it's something that this state, in particular, has dealt with, not always with our schools, but thinking about our infrastructure and what you're doing. So you think about communities in the Lakes region that have an influx of population, over the summer. You need to service that population, but that population may not be there during kind of off-season months. So it is that ebb and flow, and how do you capture servicing the population that's currently there with not increasing costs dramatically for your population that's there consistently throughout the year.
Correct.
Yeah, it's challenging to get to that balance. There's a question related, I guess this is related to that. How has Airbnb or kind of other vacation type housing contributed to some of this problem?
Sure. We work predominantly in the southern part of the state, where we don't see as much of an influence from vacation rentals, but certainly the seacoast area, the Lakes region, the mountains, the Mount Washington area. That does definitely contribute to the affordability challenge in those areas and in those marketplaces, because if you have existing housing stock that is being bought by a consumer that's not necessarily living there, but renting it out for seasonal and vacation opportunities, it takes away from the housing stock that could be providing a place for people that work locally, just like you were talking about, Dan. So if you can't house your local workforce and they have to come from away, taking more units offline to provide vacation rentals is definitely going to impact that and cause that affordability challenge to be even greater by diminishing the inventory by just that much. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what's so interesting to me about this is how regional some of these issues are. I mean, obviously this is just anecdotal, but I was just in Florida with my family, and kind of looking at the sheer volume of development that is happening is quite amazing to see. I mean, every turn there's a new development going in, or even thinking about the growth in some of our cities that I didn't realize how large that city was. Columbus, Ohio, for example, is now over 1 million in population. It's somewhere around the 10th largest city in the United States at this point. So you think about this, it looks different everywhere. The growth that Denver, has gotten in the last 15, 20 years, tremendous. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people moving to those communities.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing any more questions. So I kind of want to think about this more broadly, but from our regional perspective, Robert. So, my point being, this looks different everywhere. New Hampshire is going to look different than Florida. It's going to look different than Columbus. Looking ahead, thinking about what NeighborWorks does, thinking about the partners you work with. Dennis had thrown up, do you work with any of the community action partners or anything along those? So thinking about kind of your community, the folks you work with, what are you guys looking towards, in the next 3 to 5 years, as far as how are we going to alleviate this pressure? How are we going to kind of press that valve a little bit and try to help this, get to this solution?
I really think it's about messaging, and messaging leads to advocacy, and advocacy leads to results. And so I think, whether it's, a community action partner, whether it's a bank, whether it's a home builder, whether it's an educational institution, it's important for everybody, I think, to be aware of the challenge, get informed by doing webinars like this, and then encourage people to and be involved at your local level. I mean, we all live somewhere, and so if you're fed up with the housing challenge in your community, get more involved at that level. And I mean, there are a lot of great partners out there. I mentioned New Hampshire Housing earlier. Housing Action New Hampshire, I think, is a great place for people to learn more about how to be involved from an advocacy standpoint around policy, certainly at the state level and certainly at the municipal level, and to a certain extent at the national level. But I think we just need more people to be aware of the challenge and have a better understanding of it, so that they can become champions for this issue. For years, it felt like, as housing practitioners, we were in this by ourselves, and no one really gave a damn about housing because, hey, if I got mine, you get yours. That was the attitude of folks. Well, that's a very different message today. I think housing is on a lot of people's minds, whether you're an employer trying to hire people, or whether you're in a municipality dealing with a homeless crisis. You have a housing challenge that needs to be dealt with and reconciled. And so I just think it's important for everybody to have a better understanding, better knowledge, and then be aware of how we can all help and contribute to alleviating the problem.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think, the point is, we are all recognizing this now, right? More than anything. I mean, whether you own a home, whether you're renting, this is something that we're all experiencing, and that does change the game a little bit here. So Robert, we just want to thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning, helping to educate us this morning, and helping us to think about this problem. We want to thank everyone who has joined us this morning. We're rolling up on the 9 o'clock hour. I know all of you have to get on with your days, so we appreciate you coming. We appreciate you joining us on the second Wednesday of the month. Just as a reminder to everyone, we will be doing one more of these for throughout the summer. So we'll do one in June before the summer really sets in. We'll be taking off July and August, and then we'll be kicking up again at the start of September. So we look forward to seeing everyone next month. And once again, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.